Okay, let's get right into this. For over a decade, a series of absolutely terrifying unsolved murders haunted Long Island, New York. We're talking 10 victims, a trail that went ice cold, and a whole community living in fear. But the prime suspect, when they finally zeroed in on him, wasn't some shadowy figure lurking in the night. No, he was an architect, a family man, basically hiding in plain sight. This is the unbelievable story of the Gilgo Beach murders.
Just let that sink in for a second. Right outside one of the biggest, most famous cities in the entire world, a predator was apparently at work for years. And the sheer scale of the horror? It stayed completely hidden, literally buried in the brush along a quiet, windswept parkway.
So how did this dark secret finally come to light? Well, it all started with a search for just one missing person, a search that accidentally uncovered something so much worse.
It all kicked off in May of 2010 with the disappearance of a young woman named Shannon Gilbert. Now, when police finally started searching for her near Ocean Parkway that December, they stumbled onto this gruesome, and at first totally unrelated discovery: the remains of 4 other women. So the search got wider, and by the next spring they'd found 6 more sets of remains. The search for one missing person had accidentally revealed a serial killer's dumping ground.
10 victims in total. 10 lives just ended and then abandoned along that lonely stretch of highway. It was a staggering number that left law enforcement and, frankly, the entire public completely stunned.
You know, a really chilling pattern started to emerge pretty quickly. The killer, it seemed, had a very specific type. All the victims were women involved in sex work, and many of them used websites like Craigslist to find their clients. This detail is absolutely crucial. The killer was deliberately picking victims from the fringes of society, people he probably believed would be missed the least, and that's how he was allegedly able to operate for so long without anyone ever connecting the dots.
Now, after those initial horrifying discoveries, you'd expect this massive, swift, all-hands-on-deck investigation, right? But instead, the case went cold, and for more than 10 years there was just this frustrating, deafening silence.
Over a decade. I mean, can you imagine? Families were just waiting for answers. The killer was still out there, free. And the case files, they just gathered dust. The mystery of who was responsible for the bodies on Gilgo Beach just remained completely unsolved.
So the huge question is, why the delay? What went wrong? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was more like a perfect storm of problems that plagued the investigation. You had political turf wars between different police departments, you had bureaucratic friction with the FBI, and critically, there were just no immediate leads to follow. The trail went cold almost as fast as it was discovered.
Then, in 2022, everything changed. A brand new task force took a fresh look at all the old evidence, and using new technology, they finally got a break that pointed them toward a suspect that nobody, and I mean nobody, could have predicted.
The name that surfaced was Rex Heuermann, not a drifter, not some known criminal. He was a 59-year-old architect with his own firm in Manhattan and a family out in the suburbs. A guy who, to the entire outside world, seemed completely and utterly normal.
And this, right here, is the central shock of this entire case. On one side, you have his public persona, respected architect, a quiet neighbor, a husband, and a father. And then on the other side, you have the horrific accusation, a meticulous and brutal serial killer. The two realities just seemed completely impossible to reconcile. So how did investigators possibly bridge that gap? How did they connect a suburban architect to bodies that were buried more than a decade earlier? Well, the answer lies in a meticulous trail of modern, high-tech evidence. The case was built piece by painstaking piece. The first huge breakthrough came from DNA. Get this. Genetic material on a pizza crust that Heuermann threw away was a match to DNA found on one of the victims. Investigators then got a sample of his wife's DNA, and surprisingly, it also matched genetic material found on some of the victims, which suggested he might have transferred hairs from his own home. And beyond the DNA, they traced burner phones that were used to contact the women right back to him. And maybe most chillingly, they uncovered his obsessive online search history, where he allegedly looked for news coverage of his own crimes from his work computer. So, based on this mountain of evidence, Rex Heuermann was arrested in July of 2023. He has since been charged with 6 of the murders. Now, it is critical to note that he has pleaded not guilty to all of the charges. But the arrest is not the end of this story, not by a long shot. In a lot of ways, it's just the beginning of a whole new chapter, one that's filled with dark, disturbing questions that still linger.
The first huge question is this. Heuermann is charged with 6 murders, but remember, there were at least 10 sets of remains discovered. So who is responsible for the others? Were they dealing with more than one killer operating in the same area?
And that leads to another really unsettling possibility. Based on the complex logistics of the crimes and some of the evidence, investigators have been forced to wonder if he really acted alone. Is it possible he had an accomplice?
And maybe the most chilling question of all, are the 10 victims found along Ocean Parkway the only ones? Investigators believe there could be more victims in more locations that just haven't been discovered yet. The true scale of this horror might still be completely unknown.
And that brings us right back to the fundamental, haunting question at the very heart of this entire case. It's a question about how darkness can hide in the most ordinary of places, and how the most vulnerable among us can just disappear without a trace, leaving us all to wonder, how could this happen, right here, in plain sight?